Fun. Hey guys, today I finally resolved a asymmetry in something, and that is that my current guest has kindly invited me at least 5 or 6 times on his show, and this is the first time, long overdue, that I reciprocate. David Pakman, how are you doing, sir?
Yeah, thank you. I'm doing well, and it's a pleasure to be on.
Thank you so much. For those of you who don't know who you are, you've got a very, very successful syndicated show. I think something like 150 different stations. Does that sound right? Is that the right
It's
number?
it's at this point, I dare say it's closer to 200.
Wow, amazing. Listen to some of these YouTube metrics. Sometimes I quote brag about my metrics. Boy, does he put me to shame. YouTube metrics 225,000 plus subscribers and about to reach 150 million. I'm excited because I have 2 million. He's got 150 million. Unbelievable. Congratulations.
Thank you, and I hope those numbers grow.
You mean mine or yours or both?
Well, I guess both.
So maybe we could start actually by talking about this. Here you are, somebody who's obviously found a fantastic platform from which you could share your ideas. If you didn't have these tools available to you, it might have been very hard for you to ever find the right platform. What is some advice you can give to aspiring, uh, let's call them YouTubers, in terms of how you achieve such success? Is there such a recipe?
Well, I talk to, college students and at community stations and journalism programs all the time, and the greatest thing is that you don't really need to go and apply for a job right now if you want to start doing some kind of political or cultural or social commentary. I at no point went and was hired by anybody. I just sort of started a show at a community radio station in Massachusetts, and over time I created the show and then offered it to people. And sure, individual stations could sort of pull my program off the air, or individual viewers could stop watching or listening. But at no point did anyone have to sort of okay that I, David Pakman, have a program. And that's just so drastically different than the barriers to entry that existed for working in media even 15 years ago, but certainly 20, 30, 40 years ago. So there's no better time, really.
And do you feel that eventually, already we're seeing that a greater number of people are moving to these new mediums. Do you eventually foresee a time when television sort of becomes the dinosaur in the room and everybody is looking for the specific content that they're looking for online?
Well, to some extent, yes, but that doesn't mean that legacy media won't still be important. The smart corporate media conglomerates are moving in this direction. So this includes on-demand streaming. This includes everything that we're seeing that mimics Netflix, that Comcast and those companies are doing. So yeah, the platforms will shift, but of course, those with the most money are going to be best positioned to adjust to those platforms if they choose to, and some of them may not, and they may go the way of what we see with the newspaper crisis.
Well, so on my show, as you know, I sometimes just open up the camera and just talk about some idea. I could talk about Lionel Messi, which we'll talk about in a second. Or I also have a series where I invite guests like I am right here for one-on-one chats. And if you like, what drives my show is simply having interesting conversations with interesting people. They could be they could be chefs, they could be painters, they could be scientists, they could be gentlemen like you. I don't care, as long as it's something that people will consume and enjoy. And frankly, it would be very difficult to conceive of a context where such a show would be popular in what you call legacy media. And so it gives people such wonderful opportunities to do things that they could have never been able to do were we stuck in the old model, right?
No doubt about it. And you can see that the standard corporate media model is often not adhered to. You have long form podcasts, the Joe Rogan show, which you've been on, 3 hour shows. I'm curious, by the way, whether that's all taped back to back or if there's a break in there.
Oh, it's all one shot.
Wow, that is incredible.
And actually, before you go on, do you know what my biggest worry usually when I go on the show? People say, "Aren't you nervous? There's going to be," and I'm never nervous. My biggest worry is what happens if I need to go to the bathroom.
Right.
And so he always tells me, "Oh, don't worry. If you need to go, just get up and go. I'll just keep talking," which I never have had to do. But that's actually my only worry whenever I go on Joe Rogan.
Yeah, no, that's understandable. So long story short, yeah, I mean those things have a place because there isn't someone figuring out necessarily how it fits into a 38-minute corporate media hour of programming.
Now, how do you see your? I mean, do you have a vision, a trajectory of how you'd like to see your career unfold? Do you have a sense of where you'd like to go with this?
Well, the goal is to continue growing my program and then start developing additional programming. We have a great studio now that we have access to 24 hours a day, and I produce, 75 to 90 minutes a day of programming. So there are many hours there where the equipment just sits. And now Ben Dixon from the Benjamin Dixon Show is filming his show at our studio in the evenings. And the goal is to keep growing the programming that we're doing. We just brought on a new associate producer and bringing on another co-host coming up soon, and hopefully there can be more content that doesn't depend on me sitting in the chair, but that I'm sort of involved in and fits the theme of what we're doing.
So you become a production company, basically, not
Yeah,
just.
and a production company or a channel or a network, call it what you will.
Got it. All right, let's. So I thought what we would do today. I didn't have a specific theme in mind. And as I mentioned to you offline before we started, there are so many interesting things happening around the world that we'll just sort of take them up organically as they arise. The first one I needed to cover with you, precisely because you are born in Argentina, is my heartache, my sadness at what just happened to Lionel Messi. Help me with my heartache, please, David.
I mean, I don't know how I can help. Messi starting what was to me, it felt inevitable defeat in penalty kicks of Argentina against Chile in the America Cup on Sunday evening by missing he went first for Argentina, shooting penalty kicks. He missed, and then it was all downhill from there. And I don't know what to tell you. I mean, this has happened before in the final in the last World Cup against Germany. He didn't have a chance with a penalty kick, but just not playing particularly well and having a free kick very close to the end of the game. Much more difficult to make a free kick than it is a penalty kick, of course. But, he sort of seems to be feeling the frustration that many Argentinians do, which is why does he play so well in Europe and, on Barcelona? But then when we get to to the national team, played very well in the early games, numerous goals, etc., but just can't seem to close the deal. But then I had another thought, which is, being in Boston, Massachusetts, I experienced many years of the Red Sox curse, which I think ended up being 86 or 87 years without a World Series. And something was lost. As great as it was when the Red Sox finally won the World Series a little over a decade ago, something was lost. And the next World Series that we won, it wasn't as exciting. And for me, when the cup ends, win or lose, you lose something, and now you're just kind of waiting until the next one. And so, yeah, I'm disappointed in the results, but I recognize that part of it is the process, the struggle. And the results, actually, it would be great to get a win, but I wasn't that upset by it.
For me, it's really a question sort of cosmic justice, right? I just did a clip on Messi and sort of the perennial comparison to Maradona and so on. And my sense is that, it's really just unbelievably cruel that a player with such artistry, who otherwise seems to also be a lovely human being, could come so close on so many occasions, and yet the ball always seems to fall and, the coin falls the wrong way. That's very frustrating because, you even though you may not know the guy, you associate with him, right? You start to love the guy. I'm not Argentinian, yet I love the way he carries himself on the field. And so, frankly, I woke up yesterday and I was maybe not surprised, but I was astonished at how much I could feel actually sad. I mean, today is a bit better. Probably by next week, I won't think of it again. But for the first 24 hours or so, I really felt sadness because it just seems like cosmically this guy deserves to sort of exercise his demons. Anyways, that's that. Is your whole family supportive of the Argentinian team, or what's the general
Oh yeah,
partisanship? Yeah, okay.
absolutely. And I was here in Boston. A group of about 100 or so Argentinians got together to watch the game on Sunday. And the way that it was described to me after the loss was that it was similar to being at a funeral to be in that room. That it was one of the most depressed rooms that some people who maybe were not as part of soccer culture had ever been in. And it's probably about right.
It's funny. I've never been to Argentina. The only place I've been in South America is to Brazil. Many years ago in I think 92 or 1993, I went with one of my brothers to the Rio Carnival. I think it was a 10-day debauchery of partying. But I've never been to South America other than to Rio. And yet I somehow feel actually quite drawn to Argentina and maybe Buenos Aires in particular, maybe because many people have said that it's similar to Montreal and that it's a European type city. So it has a lot of the same feel of, a sort of a very cosmopolitan European city. You know, you've got the tango, you've got the beef, you've got the soccer. So I think that I would fit in nicely in Argentina. Do you agree?
Yeah, sure. And it is much like you described. I've never heard Montreal. I've heard more Paris if nobody took care of the streets for 15 years. Because many areas of the city have a lot of, everything from graffiti to potholes to dog poop. And that's sort of what strikes some people, that it looks very, very much like Paris, but just a little bit in disrepair. But I love it. I'm hoping to go in December. That's the city I was born in, and it's completely unique. And it is a sort of mix of South American culture with strong Italian influence in Argentina and just a European feel.
Now, do you speak Spanish?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. English is my second language. And in fact, I was interviewed on Sunday about the game by Telemundo in Spanish. I have no clue where this interview is. I've been looking for it online. I haven't found it, but presumably they used it.
Do you speak it with the Argentinian accent?
Yeah, I mean, the Argentinian Spanish accent is very Italian sounding, although because I've been out of the country on a permanent basis, just visiting since I was 5.5 years old, my accent has just sort of become kind of muddled, and most Spanish media that you hear in the US has a sort of hybrid accent that's a sort of indeterminate mix.
It's funny that you say Italian sounding, because I don't speak Spanish, and yet when I hear the different dialects and different accents of Spanish, the one that I find most pleasing to my layman's ear is the Argentinian one. And now that you're saying that it sounds Italian, we all know that it's universally true that most people find Italian to be very beautiful to listen to. So I think you're onto something there.
I could be.
Actually, I think the top 5 most beautiful sounding languages that came out at some study at some point, I think it was French, Italian, Urdu, and I can't remember the other ones, 2 other ones. But
must be Hebrew. Hebrew must be on that list.
You think so? You're being sarcastic.
I mean, I would be shocked if it were on the list, but I like the sound of Hebrew.
Okay, well, actually, I recently had a guest on who's Arabic speaking, and my mother tongue is Arabic, and he's Egyptian originally, and so I asked him in Arabic. Because usually of all the different Arabic dialects, the 2 that are considered to be most beautiful is the Lebanese one and the Egyptian one. And so I asked him, since he's Egyptian, which of the 2 is more beautiful? He gave a very diplomatic answer. But even within the context of the different Arabic dialects, there's a very clear hierarchy. Oh, did you hear that?
Yeah, it sounded like a dynamite exploded.
That was thunder.
Okay.
These are the gods agreeing that 2 Jews are sitting and talking to each other. All right, let's get down to some other content. First, I thought I would talk to you about this reaction that I've gotten on Twitter from some of my followers who apparently were surprised or displeased that I'm speaking with you, because apparently you are a regressive that needs to be corrected. Where is this coming from? Because I haven't picked it up. In all the times that you have graciously invited me on your show, I thought you were very reasonable, very serious guy. I didn't pick up any ostrich-like thinking. So what are they thinking about when they are levying this accusation at you?
So you're saying accusations were made on Twitter, but they were not substantiated?
That is true.
Okay. I find that shocking. No, I don't know what they were referring to. I mean, you would have to ask them, I guess. I get criticized for criticizing the regressive left, which I now consider more the authoritarian left, I think is more sort of relevant and less misused. And I also get criticized for being part of the so-called regressive left. So I don't know. I mean, I get accused of being a Zionist shill, right, and a defender of Muslim terror as well. So this is not new, I guess.
Well, I guess I know of one public feud that you've had. I haven't followed it very closely, but somebody pointed me to it. I think it's Atheist Rue. Do you know who that is?
I mean, I think it's someone has pointed me to some videos where they do like takedown videos of other people, right?
Yeah, well, I don't know if that's what he specializes in, but I think that he might have been, and I hope if I'm wrong, somebody will correct me in the comments section. But I think he might have taken exception to your disagreeing regarding the epidemiology of crimes in the U.S. Broken down along racial lines. Could that be one of the things that people are upset about?
I get you'd have to ask them. I'm not
Okay.
sure.
Okay, so you don't know about that particular video. I'll have to see if I could dig it up. I think it was Atheist True, but maybe I'm wrong. All right, let's move on to some of the current topics. Brexit. What do you think of it? And I don't know if you've had a chance to look at. I put out two clips right after the vote came out, where I wasn't taking a position for or against Brexit, but rather I was commenting on the post discourse and then this idea of having a referendum until we get the decision that we want. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I haven't seen your clips on it. I've been thinking about it extensively. I'm very, very close to booking some tickets to London, which have dropped in price drastically. And I mean, you can go nonstop from Boston for $500 now, which really seems like quite a good deal. And it seems like the currency fluctuations by year end will be very, very favorable to Americans. But sort of personal travel plans aside, I'm increasingly open to the idea that again, this is a non-binding referendum. I'm open to the idea that they will not leave the European Union. There have been some interesting pieces written about that over the last couple of days. There's been a lot of reaction from my audience about the extent to which fears about immigrants played a role in how people voted. And I got emails from some people saying that they are really economic fears. It's only sort of an aside or a coincidence that the fears are caused by immigrants, but that really it's the economic impact of those immigrants and the sort of mobility of labor as a result of the European Union and how it exists. Others have written to me and said, you know, David, I feel like I'm very liberal and progressive, but when it comes to immigration and refugees, the UK is far, far smaller than the United States. And from a purely sort of mathematical perspective, our ability to absorb immigrants is far lower. So it's not about any sort of antipathy towards people from other countries or nativism or xenophobia, but it's just sort of mathematical, and there are economic realities about this. And when immigrants come into other EU countries, then they can come to the UK, and that's essentially how it works. And don't think of it as necessarily bigoted, which is also an interesting perspective. So it's been 72 hours of just a lot of different perspectives on the issue.
Well, I think what upsets me is that, I'm exposed to both sides of the issue by virtue of having friends that fall on either, end of the aisle. But of course, say my academic colleagues would typically all fall within the Remain camp. And many of them had the usual sort of discourse of everybody who voted to leave must have been a xenophobic, racist, KKK, Nazi member. And I just thought that that was so grotesque, especially when it's coming from people that are otherwise intellectually sophisticated. I mean, surely it can't be that every single person who raised some of the concerns that you just enunciated is a rabid Nazi, right? And so that's sort of what I was referring to. And I explained to people that I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't care. I'm looking at it from a process perspective. For example, in Quebec, we've had a similar issue where in 1980 we had a referendum that was called to see whether Quebec wanted to separate, and the separation camp lost. And then 15 years later, when they thought the demographic realities would be in their favor, they held another referendum, which they barely lost. And basically the reality is, let's keep holding these referendums until we win, and once we win, it becomes irreversible. But there's something grotesque about that. And yet people thought that I was being unreasonable, I was supporting xenophobia and so on. It seems crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, the problem, I think, on the internet specifically, and I deal with this, I mean, to say every day is perfectly accurate, is that if you want to sort of make any kind of more nuanced argument about most things, there are a few exceptions, and I can't actually think of any offhand, but I'm sure they exist. But with most issues, there's this desire to sort of paint people into a corner. So if you sort of acknowledge the fact that there has been this Britain First movement, and there's been more, at least vocal, nationalist, nativist sentiment in Europe, UK included, if you just sort of mention that, people will come, as they did to me on Twitter today, and say, how dare you say that I am personally a racist because I voted to exit? And of course, that's not what I was saying. There are genuinely people who just disagree with the concept of the European Union, and for whatever reasons, it doesn't even matter, and those were their priorities in voting. But I haven't yet successfully figured out a way to address that. Something that can be a motivation for some doesn't necessarily mean that you're accusing everybody of falling under some particular ism.
Right. Are there any, so, given your platform, I mean, I'd like to say about 99% of positive feedback, but the 1% of a large number is still a lot of people, and your platform is much bigger than mine. And so have you gotten to the point where you could receive the tsunami of negativity and it rolls off your back, or are there particular structures of messages that come your way that throw you back and upset you?
Well, I mean, of course, we receive 2,000 to 3,000 YouTube comments a day, so it's not even possible to keep up with all of them, but I do try to sort of look at a sampling. If a video has a very strong percentage of people taking time to actually email me through my website, I mean, certainly sort of a calm, rational email is going to have much more weight with me than some anonymous or effectively anonymous comment on YouTube, which also insults either my personal ethnicity, heritage, religion, or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I think I pay more attention to email rather than YouTube and Twitter comments for sure. Do certain comments bother me? Most of them, I'm pretty used to it. I couldn't really tell you what the characteristics are of the messages that tend to bother me more. You just sort of know it when you see it.
I think I could answer for myself. I think in my case, it's violations of social protocol. In other words, I don't care if the content of what you're saying is A, B, or C, even if it might be an offensive position or if you insult me of being a Jewish, whatever. It's that when people are, they just violate certain protocol in terms of how they speak to you, right? In terms of how they could take certain liberties, which they otherwise might be a bit more tepid in doing if they were facing you in person. And usually when I respond to somebody, it's because that has angered me. It's as if you've sort of thrown the gauntlet and these are fighting words and I'm ready to fight back. And I've been quite good at this point of walking away from most of these, but once in a while, some bastard will suck me in, and then my wife will come into the room, she'll see my face, she goes, oh God, what has somebody written about you on the internet? So it's still a work in progress, but I'm certainly getting a lot better. Joe Rogan, by the way, told me, at one point I was talking to him, and I mentioned something about YouTube comments, and he looked at me in complete astonishment. He said, what kind of buffoon must you be? I mean, he didn't say those words, to actually read YouTube comments. You never read YouTube comments. So I'm trying to implement that advice, but it's tough to do because I also like to think that I'm somebody who's very accessible with my followers. You can't answer everybody, but I'd like them to feel as though I really am reading them and so on. So
yeah, I mean, I think, I understand this whole idea of don't read YouTube comments at all, but if I'm going to use a platform, I feel like I should be at least ostensibly accountable to it and have some sense of what it is that's going on. So I sort of get the instinct of, who cares? I'm doing my show and I'm doing it the way I want to do it. So who cares what the reaction is? But I feel like if I am using a platform, I should at least be open to feedback on it.
I hear you. All right, let's move on to, this is relevant to the U.S. We went to Britain. Let's go to the U.S. So Trump versus Clinton. Give me your best sort of summary of what's going on. Give me your predictions. Give me anything you want.
Well, I predicted Donald Trump wouldn't be the Republican nominee, so I may be the last person anybody should go to for predictions.
Who did you predict?
I didn't know.
Okay.
I mean, I thought I sort of had a sense that maybe Jeb Bush would make a comeback at some point, although I certainly didn't want that. I thought it was maybe at a certain point going to be Ted Cruz. Trump's polling has fallen completely off of a cliff here. In a couple of recent polls, he's down by 10 and 12 points, respectively, in 2 polls to Hillary Clinton nationally. Of course, because of this electoral college system that we have, the national polls can sort of be an indicator of how things are going, but it really will come down to certain states, and it's a little early to look at that. I see the entire Donald Trump candidacy as a total clown show. There is a contingent of people in the U.S. who have sort of become prideful and boastful that they support someone in spite of the fact that they have no experience politically, in spite of the fact that he doesn't seem to really know anything about anything, in spite of the fact that his big pitch has been he would put the best people around him, and then he put a press secretary on TV who said she doesn't speak for the Trump campaign. Well, you're the press secretary, that's kind of your job. Selected Ben Carson for a little while to help him pick a vice presidential candidate. So even saying, I may not know, but I'll put good people around me, he's failed there. So I see it as a total joke. I think it is a huge indictment on a significant portion of the American voting public that not only are people sort of drawn in by the idea of Trump, and that I understand more actually, but that when presented with evidence about how disastrous Trump would be for the U.S., they actually seem to become sort of emboldened and take pride in the fact that they're not going to be convinced by arguments based in evidence and fact not to vote for the guy. And that pride is really the scariest part to me.
Okay, now that just out of the to pursue sort of a fair assessment of both candidates, are there any things that worry you about Hillary Clinton? And if you can't think of any, then maybe I can jump in and help you.
Oh, absolutely. I did not vote for Hillary Clinton in the primary election. I find that Hillary Clinton on foreign policy is too hawkish. I find that Hillary Clinton has been not unclear, I guess I would call it deliberately vague during the debates with Bernie Sanders about a number of issues that, as it relates to corporate power and regulation. This includes everything from, banks and Glass-Steagall, and not separating the speculative investment activities and the personal banking, commercial and personal banking activities of banks. On the minimum wage, she has, she uses very specific language about wanting to raise it, but to several dollars less than what the Democratic Party has adopted as its platform of $15 an hour. There's a very, very long list. And, I did a 20-minute expose on the differences between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. So I have no shortage of complaints about her.
For me, again, I say this as a Canadian, and so I don't have, yes, of course, American politics end up affecting Canadians, but again, I don't have a direct dog in the fight. To me, Hillary Clinton, first of all, it is difficult to imagine somebody who lacks authenticity any more than she does. In other words, if I constructed an android that looked less human, I couldn't come up with somebody better than Hillary. And again, I say this not to sort of be flippant, but rather because oftentimes the populace decides in these elections on these very visceral things, right? Who looks presidential? Not that Donald Trump does, and certainly not that he speaks as though he's presidential. But she comes across as somebody unbelievably scripted, fake. She's not exactly strong on the Islam issue. To the extent that there's anything related to Islam, because so far we haven't been able to get either Clinton or Obama to utter those words, because we know it's due to lack of art appreciation, to beard bullying, to climate change, to workplace violence, but it's never due to Islam. Doesn't that in itself maybe explain why some people are moving to Trump, because at least they feel as though he is capturing their sentiments about this particular issue in a more accurate way than Hillary?
Yeah, that certainly may be a reason, and this also may be part of why currently there are some relatively strong numbers for the Libertarian candidate, Gary Johnson. And what's interesting is when you do three-way polling versus just Clinton versus Trump, when you add Gary Johnson, a Libertarian, you would typically expect that would hurt the Republican nominee. But it's not really changing the numbers. Hillary Clinton, in a recent poll, whether you include Gary Johnson or not, is leading by about 6%, 6.5%. So what's interesting is that means there are people, Gary Johnson is appealing sort of equally to people on the left and right today in June. I think that will change, but that sort of tells us a lot about how many people see Hillary Clinton. So yeah, I think we can all give reasons why for different reasons, depending on where from the political spectrum you're coming from. Hillary Clinton is sort of a concerning candidate, but we're very close to releasing an extensive piece on why, at least if you're a Bernie supporter, the idea of voting Trump or third party or not voting is illogical. And we'll make that case. Not everybody will agree, but I think that we're going to make a pretty good case.
When is that coming out?
A week or two, I think.
Got you. Speaking of, I guess, one of your most famous clips that's already out, your fantastic takedown of my main man, the Grand Ostrich himself, Reza Aslan. Why don't you tell us about this? What compelled you to do this? And anybody who hasn't watched it, I highly recommend you go check it out. Tell us a bit about that clip.
Yeah, the clip is called Reza Aslan Cannot Be Trusted. And, I was introduced to Reza Aslan in the way that many in the US were, which is when he was interviewed by Lauren Green on Fox News. And it was an interview which I discussed on the program. And I was essentially completely defending and supporting Reza Aslan. I thought that the interview was essentially a joke. The interviewer was unprepared. She looked bad. It was basically just, she was interviewing someone and seemed to have no idea who she was interviewing. And from a journalistic perspective, it was a disaster. After that point, Reza Aslan, maybe because of the increased attention and notoriety he received from that viral interview on Fox News, started commenting after more news stories related to religion and Islam. And it started to sort of feel to me as though he wasn't really being complete in his explanation. So I say that to say not that he was deliberately lying, but more that it seemed that he was not telling the whole truth on some issues. And eventually, in working with a segment producer of mine, we started sort of looking into some of the specific claims he had made around female genital mutilation and some other issues. And it turned up just a treasure trove of counterpoints and evidence that he absolutely was not being full in his explanations. And we decided to put together a piece just sort of analyzing the things he had said and how he compared to sourced data that had different views on many of these issues than he did.
Now, do you think, I mean, I'm asking you here to infer something without any sort of inside knowledge, but do you think that many of these apologists in the deep recesses of their private thoughts late at night when they go into their beds actually know that they're full of BS, or do they actually convince themselves or believe their lies?
I mean, if you're asking me specifically about Reza Aslan, I don't know, but I can tell you as a general idea, I know people who are sort of in this general business of analysis and opinion and commentary who have absolutely convinced themselves that their unsubstantiated ideas are correct and accurate and true. And I've also met people who very clearly have chosen a sort of character to play and positions to defend in spite of the fact that their real sincerely held positions, for lack of a better term, are probably, if at minimum, more nuanced, if not completely different in some cases.
I've said this several times publicly, that I actually respect the hardline Islamists more than I respect some of the Western apologists who grant them cover, because at least the former are acting out of their conviction. However wrong it might be, they actually do have testicular fortitude. What really upsets me are the Westerners that kind of go around carrying their water for them. They drive me crazy, and they're the reasons why the whole terms Ostrich Brigade and Castrati Brigade and so on I've come up with, because it seems extraordinary to me. I mean, if I were doing a psychoanalysis of their motives, I would say that in the deep recesses of their private thoughts, they know that they are full of shit. Now, it could be that they actually convince themselves, right? The best way to lie to somebody else is to first lie to yourself, right? Because then the lie to the other person will be executed more accurately. So maybe they've somehow convinced themselves. But deep, deep, deep in the recesses of their minds, I think that they know that they're full of shit, because it's impossible to propose or espouse some of the positions that they do faced against a tsunami of evidence that is contrary to their discourse.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it just depends on who we're talking about, but both scenarios, there's no doubt both scenarios exist.
Right. I mean, I've made a similar comment when it comes to postmodernists. I don't know how familiar you are with that academic movement. It's basically a bunch of sort of randomly generated nonsense, which has been able to sort of infect endless generations of students. It's complete gibberish. And I've put that question to people in academia to ask them whether some of the founders of postmodernism, if they thought that they actually believed these things. And I truly believe, I can't test it at this point, the guys in question have passed away, but I truly believe that they knew that they were charlatans, but they found a way to draw an audience, very much the same way that a religious prophet, right? It's the cult of personality, right? They've got this verbal fluency. They're able to attract people with the charisma of their personality. And then any bullshit that comes out of my mouth, you'll buy it.
Yeah, although I don't know that, I think that for me it's different to say, I know, to take an example, I know that the truth about female genital mutilation and its connection to the Muslim world is A, and I'm going to go out on TV and say B, right? I think that's sort of one thing. Another one, I think it's different to say, I am interested in what considering postmodernism and deconstruction and structuralism, whatever, right? Although I'm not totally sure about its direct connection and influence on day-to-day life, for example. I mean, I think that it's just sort of different when you're talking about philosophy and when you're talking about sort of empirical realities about something like female genital mutilation. I think you're sort of, it sounds like you're equating them conceptually, when I think that there are reasonable distinctions to be made.
Although interestingly, Reza Aslan, to kind of link these two topics together, Reza Aslan uses a sort of an ethos of postmodernism when he basically says, when you read text, who are you to say that, kill the Jews means that? I mean, it's really, you have to understand Arabic philology, you have to understand the context. Kill in Arabic, it merely means to kill with love and so on. So he is actually applying the bullshit of postmodernism to spew his bullshit.
Yeah, or you could say that the critique you're applying to postmodernism, that it doesn't necessarily really mean anything, he might be applying to Muslim texts.
Fair enough. All right, what's next? Let me look here at my... Oh, right, here's a good one. Sometimes people say, you invite guests and you don't engage in debates or you don't attack them frontally. And of course, the reason is not because I don't, take people to task. It's because when you have guests, as you well know, even if you disagree with them, you have to do it in a polite, reasonable manner. Otherwise, you won't be able to invite other guests. They won't want to come on your show, right? Let's see if we could find a topic where, by definition, we're going to disagree.
Well, you're pro-death penalty, right?
That's exactly the one I was going to choose. Very well. That's exactly the one. I have it right here, number 4 on my list. So as I was looking at your Wikipedia page and some of the positions you've taken, I saw that you were against the death penalty. I thought, okay, let me put that one down and let's see if we can discuss it. So give me your best shot for why we should never kill anybody under any circumstance.
Well, when you say, you're saying when the state, why the state should not, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I don't think, if the idea is for me to give a sort of one-liner about why I oppose the death penalty, that's not really how I think about it. I mean, I think sort of, I like to look at different elements of the death penalty individually, and then when I consider them together, I can't find any reasons for the state to kill people. Some of them are practical sort of problems, and some of them are more ideological. I mean, I'll start with sort of the practical, which I think sort of make the others obsolete or maybe even not worthy of discussion. Innocence and the death penalty. A number of different studies have talked about anywhere from 1 in 25 on death row to 1 in 20, somewhere between 4 and 5%, seem to be not guilty, or at least within if not completely innocent, at least within the bounds of reasonable doubt, not guilty. There are I don't even remember the numbers now, but in terms of mentally ill individuals, and by mentally ill, I think it's very easy to say anyone who commits a mass shooting where they kill 50 people is to some degree mentally ill. I'm talking about the legal definition of unfit to really stand trial or even understand the consequences of what they did. And if you think of the overlap, there are not guilty, mentally ill people on death row. Mathematically, it's a certainty. And so that alone to me is a good reason to say we're not going to do this. High cost of the death penalty. And this is almost like a fiscally conservative argument. And, I understand much of the high cost of the death penalty is because you are entitled to a certain appeals process when you're on death row. And many pro-death penalty advocates will say, well, David, if you're concerned about the cost, eliminate the appeals. Why would we eliminate appeals when it appears that somewhere between 4 and 5% of those on death row are not guilty of the crimes they've been convicted of? I'm not going to say, let's make it even quicker to kill these people. And then also, when you talk about deterrence, I've not seen anything that has been even remotely convincing that the death penalty as a potential sentence versus life without parole deters people from committing crime. I mean, I think certainly if you look at the difference between life without parole and a $250 fine for murder, for example, I'm convinced you would see a practical difference in the deterrent effect of those two punishments. I've not seen anything that suggests going from the potential of life without parole to the potential for the death penalty being an effective deterrent to those crimes that we've sort of determined are worthy of the state putting people to death. I mean, these are just a few of the thoughts, and there's so many more in terms of the application of the death penalty, the idea of the impact on the families of victims and the impact that appeals process has on them. I mean, we could go on all day.
Yeah, so actually, I wrote an article, a brief article on my Psychology Today column a few years ago, immediately after. Do you remember those two killers out of Connecticut who got the death penalty because they stalked a woman as she was going, I think, to do her groceries, followed her back home, raped the two young daughters, set them on fire, killed them, and then they thought they had killed the father, but that he ended up surviving. Do you remember that case at all?
I don't remember it.
Anyway, so what had sort of triggered me to or prompted me to write this article was subsequent to those two guys having been found guilty and given a death sentence. My argument is actually one that's sort of somewhat more abstract and more philosophical, and that is, I mean, I understand the argument about deterrence, and there are people who argue this way or that way, and you could sort of massage statistics any way you want, because I've actually read both sides of that discussion. We could talk about the economics of the death penalty versus not, and certainly you have a lot of valid points. My thinking is there anything that anybody can ever do that makes them lose their right to survive? So it's really at an abstract philosophical level. And my thinking is as follows. Our emotional system has evolved through an evolutionary process. So, for example, the sense of revenge, the sense of retribution is an inherent part of our sociality. As a matter of fact, it ensures that you don't come and try to rape my women, because you know that if you come and do that, I'm going to come with a lot of nasty friends of mine and get your women, right? And so there is an inherent, now that doesn't mean that if something is natural that we should do it and so on, but that emotion exists within us for a reason. Now, we try to curb it because we live in civilized society, but I've argued that it's actually barbaric at times to sublimate that which is quite instinctual. And so when it comes, for example, to somebody who has his DNA in the rectum of 10 children, then I think that we can put away the possibility that he is innocent. And so if we did something like nothing more than the following: we banned the death penalty except if your sperm is found in the rectum of 10 children, right? I'm sounding very colorful, but my point is that there is a way where you set the certainty of guilt and how egregious the crime is, so that philosophically you could say that person is so nasty that he deserves to die. And that's the position that I come from. Otherwise, I think a lot of the arguments that you make, I would be with you on those. But I don't think that for any condition it is too cruel and inappropriate for the government to kill people. I see nothing wrong with that morally. And as a matter of, and let me just mention one more thing. And if we're using the argument of probability and statistics, there is zero chance that a recidivist child rapist could ever escape and do it again when he is dead. There is a chance.
But if the argument is that with life without parole, the chance exists not that the individual would be paroled, but that they would escape prison, that's an argument for figuring out why people can escape prison. I mean, I think that if we're going to make the argument that the prisons just aren't good enough to keep people in, that's not a good argument for me to say kill people. Anytime you have an ineffective system, I don't think that that's a good reason to say, let's do something completely different. I think that that's faulty sort of logic to say, the prisons just aren't good enough to guarantee people don't escape, so let's kill them instead. That seems like very specious argumentation to me. I mean, as far as your example, I can imagine many situations, and I've said this before, where I would feel like someone who has perpetrated a crime against someone I love deserves to die. I can imagine that. Now, fortunately, that has not happened, right? But I can certainly understand how we can all come up with scenarios, right? DNA in the rectum of children. My sister is killed, raped and killed, whatever. There's no doubt that I can come up with a case for why that should be under the admittedly small list of crimes for which the state should kill people. But the fact that I could be driven by emotion to want that revenge, because again, I don't think that when I think about it with a cool mind, right, my sister not having been raped and killed by someone, I don't think that my emotional reaction and desire for revenge justifies the state killing someone. I just still don't see it. So if you're saying you've come up with some great examples of what might make me feel like someone should die, but that's a different question than whether, as a matter of public policy, the state should kill that person.
But why don't we decouple? I understand the argument when you personalize it, that it can trigger those sort of retribution sentiments. But let's remove that, right? I mean, is there nothing that can compel you to feel sufficient anger, not at somebody who's close to you, but at a crime, and not even one crime? We could set the bar, right? Don't set it at 4 child rapes and killings, set it at 10. Okay, so is there nothing? And again, this is a very philosophical argument, right? It's not.
It is, and here's my problem with that argument, and it's a very specific one. We can all come up with some bar, right? We could come up with it, and let's say it is 10. The problem is, if 9 child rapes gets you life without parole, and 10 child rapes gets you the death penalty, what does that say to the families of the victims of a group of 9 child rapes? That the crime committed against their loved one, as bad as it is not bad enough to get the worst punishment. Had, however, their attacker raped a 10th person, then it would be worthy of a more significant punishment. And to me, that's bogus. I mean, we're really now getting into decisions that the state should just absolutely not be making. I mean, I think that we can, your line might be 10, mine is 8.
Right.
What does that do to the people who had 7 kids, all of which were raped? Sorry, this crime is bad, but it's in the second tier. There's a worse tier. And you're sorry.
But although the sort of the arbitrary line thing could be applied to anything, right? I mean,
of course.
Why is it that 55 is the state limit, and usually they give you a plus or minus 5 leeway? What if you were going 61 or 62? What if you're going 62? What if you were going 62? So we could apply that slippery slope arbitrary line to anything, right?
Of course. And somebody could say, well, okay, but so why set it there as opposed to somewhere else? And it's by nature arbitrary. And I think that the way to, if it's a theoretical philosophical conversation, then maybe we have to be open to the idea that removing some kind of arbitrary nature is positive. But the problem is we can take a step down the ladder and say, okay, well, what about life with the possibility of parole and life without parole? You would still have some arbitrary difference between what qualifies there. So there's really no getting away from it, but I'm thinking more in the way in which it would affect the families of the victims.
By the way, do you know that, since we're talking about child rapists and so on, I think I might have even mentioned this stat on one of my Joe Rogan appearances, the typical recidivist sort of child predator has, I don't know how they got the stat, but has usually raped or molested up to, can you guess how many children before he is caught?
I don't know.
Any number? Give me a number. Anything.
I wouldn't even want to guess because I have no idea.
Okay, it's about 100. Okay, so in other words, this is a repeat pattern. It's one where, it's not as though somebody, when we talk about the legal system, we talk about mitigating circumstances. Maybe he was drunk and he was high and he didn't know what he did, right? Those are the types of things but when you are a, repeat predator on children, and there is absolutely no chance in hell that you could ever be innocent, I actually feel quite strong in my moral stance that I would not shed one tear if that guy were wasted into oblivion. But anyways, let's move on.
Again, whether I would cry because the state killed someone is not a good way to determine what the state should do for me.
Fair enough. Why don't you hit me with some topics that you'd like to cover that you're thinking about? We've got about another 10 minutes that we can go.
I didn't really have an agenda per se. I'm not.
What are some things that are keeping you up late at night worrying? I mean, you're thinking of course, you don't want Donald Trump to win. We got that. Is there anything else that's worrying you about the current state of affairs in the world?
What is worrying me? Yeah, I mean, certainly, I'm worried that, like with too many things where humans don't really act until you're in a total crisis situation, I'm worried about everything from, antibiotic resistance to income inequality to climate change. I mean,
have you, speaking of climate change, before you go on with some other triggers of worry, have you followed any of my critique of Bill Nye?
I haven't seen those.
Okay, so Bill Nye, right after the Paris attacks, in November of last year, appeared on HuffPo Live, and it's easy to find the clip for those of you who want to verify what I'm saying. What I'm saying is veridical. Where he basically argued that it is very conceivable, it's very clear that one can draw a direct link between climate change and what happened in Paris. And more generally, of course, the argument is that in the Middle East in general is very much tied to climate change. The argument usually goes there was a drought that affected prices of crops, it made people move from the rural areas to the urban areas, caused density, and this is what I call idiotic butterfly thinking. Everything is connected to everything else. When it comes to the influence of climate change on the Paris attacks, in the list of 1,000 possible causes, it's ranked at number 1,000. Yet somebody like Bill Nye can get up and say, oh, there's a very clear link between solar panels and carbon emission levels and the Paris attacks. What are your thoughts on that?
I've not heard the argument in its specifics, so I would not be able to comment, but I would agree that, I think that from a philosophical perspective, there is probably significant value in sort of considering these butterfly effect scenarios. But from a sort of practical operational perspective, if I were looking at solving the issue of mass shootings of the style you're describing, or mass casualty events like the ones you're describing, I don't know that I would go first, second, third, fourth, fifth, or sixth to a drought in the Middle East necessarily. But I've not seen that argument. I've not read it, so I think it would be best for me not to comment specifically unless I were much more familiar with it.
Well, I think it really stems from sort of a couple of sources. Number one, the refusal to link anything with negative to Islam, number one. But number two, it's a form of a quasi-religious feeling or belief, where instead of praying at the altar of some Abrahamic God, you pray at the altar of some secular quasi-religious belief. So, and that becomes, in this case, climate change. So I am an agent of climate change. I'm speaking now as Bill Nye, and therefore every possible calamity in the world, in one way or another, is linked back to climate change. And if we are to criticize the stupidity and the irrationality of religious thinking when it comes from people who are truly fundamentalist religious folks, then we also have to be fair and criticize those who, while using a different target for their faith, are succumbing to the same cognitive biases.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you're an evangelical Christian, the solution to basically every problem is Jesus, right? I mean, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, I think is sort of the best way. If you have gotten to the point where you believe climate change is the only problem, then it is going to appear to be the cause of every problem, no matter what it is that happens.
Exactly. All right. As we end this, are there any projects that you're currently working on other than this clip that you mentioned that's going to be released soon? Any other sort of grand projects that haven't yet been released to the public that you'd like to promote before we wrap it up?
Not in particular. We have, I mean, a really big project from a financial perspective is that we are very close to launching a completely new website, which is going to have fascinatingly improved functionality and is going to just be really, really great. A whole new membership system for our paid subscribers. And it's been 3 or 4 months in the making. It's been, for our standards, an expensive project. And I'm really hopeful that it'll be a great thing for the program. We're also hiring right now a full-time producer with some on-air opportunities based in the Boston area, and we're sort of at the first interview phase. So if qualified followers of yours who are living or willing to live in Boston and already authorized to work in the United States, I will add, a lot of applicants from Canada actually, then get in touch, because we're always looking for good people, and now we're specifically looking for one good person.
And if any of those people are hired through having watched this show, I get a 10% cut for at least 3 years of their salaries. Is that true? Please say it on air. Yes?
I'm not aware of that at all.
Hey, David, thank you so much. Stay on the line. It's been a real pleasure. I'm glad that I was finally able to have you on the show. Cheers, buddy.
Thank you.
Cheers.